Keep remembering the golden rule of the satanic Jezebel spirit. Subtle manipulation when weak, overt intimidation when strong. The Catholic Church, with the goddess Mary as their figurehead, was now very, very strong and therefore very, very intimidating. Whenever anyone protested against the Church or didn't fall in line with the dictates of the hierarchy, they were relentlessly hounded to death, and it wasn't until 1517 that things finally began to change. Led by Martin Luther and other prominent men like Ulrich Zwingli, a revolt called the Reformation took place. These were men who were sickened by the excesses and corruption of the Catholic Church and who bravely attempted to stand against its might, risking their lives to expose the corruption and deceit and to bring people back to true biblical Christianity. This movement saw millions of people turn away from Roman Catholicism and renouncing the Pope as the spiritual leader of the Church. The invention of the printing press around this time was key, as it meant that cost-effective, rapid mass production of pamphlets and books could be placed in the hands of individuals in their own language. The printing press opened the flow of information that the Catholic Church had tried to keep shut. People could now see for themselves just how much they had been duped by the system. They could now learn independently about God for the first time in 1,000 years. Of course, the Catholic Church did everything in their power to stop these pamphlets getting into the hands of the ordinary man. They tried even harder to stop the Bible itself from being translated into English, or any other language for that matter. Satan knows how powerful the Word of God is. The Reformers eventually achieved the translations, but it came at the price of great persecution and even death for those involved. It's worth looking at how it developed to see just how much Satan opposed it and to drive home an important principle. As we noted, by 600 AD, the Word of God had been restricted by the Catholic Church to just one language, the Latin Vulgate. The all-powerful Roman Catholic Church refused to allow the Scriptures to be available in any other language, and if anyone was found to be in possession of one, they would be executed. The reason, as we've noted, is very simple. At that time, only priests were educated in Latin. The common citizen was not. If the people couldn't read the Bible for themselves, they were dependent upon the Church to tell them what it said. If the Church controlled the flow of information that reached the average person, they controlled the average person. The Church would have the power to rule without question, the power to deceive, and the power to extort money. Nobody could question their biblical teachings because nobody knew for themselves what the Bible actually said. The Church capitalized on this forced ignorance between 400 and 1400 AD in the era we now call the Dark Ages. The first handwritten English manuscripts of the Bible were produced in the 1380s by John Wycliffe, an Oxford scholar, professor and theologian who is known throughout Europe for his fierce opposition to Rome. With the help of his followers and assistant, they produced dozens of English translations which were translated from the Latin Vulgate, the only source text available to them at that time. The Pope was so infuriated by this that 44 years after Wycliffe had died, he ordered for his bones to be dug up, crushed and scattered into the river. One of Wycliffe's followers was Johann Hus, who also thought that people should be permitted to read the Bible in their own language. He opposed the tyranny of the Roman Church that threatened anyone possessing a non-Latin Bible with execution. Hus was burned at the stake in 1415, with Wycliffe's manuscript Bibles used as kindling for the fire. The last prophetic words of Hus were, "In 100 years God will raise up a man whose calls for reform cannot be suppressed." Almost exactly 100 years later, in 1517, That prophecy came true when Martin Luther nailed his famous 95 Theses of Contention into the church door at Wittenberg. These were a list of 95 issues of heretical theology and crimes of the Catholic Church. Martin Luther went on to be the first person to translate and publish the Bible in the commonly spoken dialect of the German people. Fox's Book of Martyrs records that in that same year, in 1517, 7 people were burned at the stake by the Roman Catholic Church for the crime of teaching their children to say the Lord's Prayer in English rather than Latin. But if the existence of handwritten Bibles was a threat to Rome's power, the invention of the printing press was their worst nightmare. Its inventor, Johann Gutenberg, invented it in the 1450s, and the first book to ever be printed was a Latin Bible, which was printed in Mainz in Germany. Though he had created what many believe is the most important invention in history, Gutenberg was a victim of unscrupulous business associates who took control of his business and left him in poverty. Nevertheless, the invention of the movable type printing press meant that Bibles and books could finally be effectively produced in large quantities in a short period of time. This was essential to the success of the Reformation and the breaking of the stranglehold of Catholic power. In the 1490s, another Oxford professor and the personal physician to King Henry VII and VIII, Thomas Linacre, decided to learn Greek. After reading the Gospels in Greek and comparing it to the Latin Vulgate, he wrote in his diary, "Either this is not the Gospel, or we are not Christians." The Latin had become so corrupt that it no longer represented the Gospel at all.